Wow, it's such a privilege and a pleasure to be with you all today, looking at this seminar on cultivating cultural awareness. John's already mentioned it, but for those of you who don't know me, I'm Ruth and I'm British. I'm married to Mark, who is sitting somewhere in the background. We're currently based in Kettering in the Midlands, in the UK as of last September. But before that, we spent 11 years in Turkey as part of a church planting team and then church leadership team. So I'm going to be sharing from my experience of living overseas. I am delighted to say that this seminar has been prepared in collaboration with my dear Turkish friend Oya, who is joining us here today. So although she probably won't be speaking during the main time, her input is very much within what I'm going to be sharing today. And also with Dave and Leslie Nunn, who are leading Open Door Church here in Kettering, with Adrian, I think might be around too, and where I'm now a member. So they have extensive experience both of overseas travel through kind of a translocal ministry type model, as well as church leadership in the UK context. So we're going to hear from Dave a little bit later. So let's jump in, cultivating cultural awareness. So today we're going to be asking the question of what capabilities do we and our churches and communities need to grow in to be growing and cultivating cultural awareness. And we're going to start open the lid on how we start to grow some of those capabilities. Just before we move on, I'd like us to do a 1-minute activity. I'd like you to think of where you are based right now. So it might be work or a church, maybe a team, might be a community. How many cultures are you coming into contact with or are represented there? So where are you based and how many cultures are you coming into contact with? So as an example, I've made a list here for Open Door Kettering. And I started to think we've got Nigerian culture, Ghanaian culture, we've got various types of British culture, Zimbabwean, Polish, Sierra Leonean. I could go on, and I'm sure Dave could also fill me in and correct me later. Have a think just for 1 minute and make a list in your head or on a piece of paper about your context. Aware that we could probably keep going and thinking about that for a while, but I'm going to move on for the moment. Keep your list to hand. We will be referring to it in a bit. So what is cultural awareness? Or as it's being referred to in the global coaching community that I'm starting to enter into, cultural intelligence, or CQ. We've got IQ, EQ for emotional intelligence, and now CQ for cultural intelligence. Well, in 1992, Gary Chapman, bear with me here, wrote a book, The 5 Love Languages. And some of you here might be familiar with it. Don't worry if you're not. The premise was that when we give and receive, or we show love, we each have a preferred way to do it. And he claimed that there were 5 ways, or 5 languages to show love, and that we each have one we prefer. So it might be words of affirmation or physical touch. It might be acts of service, etc. Now, whatever you think of the book, whether you love it or hate it, or you've never heard of it, it was helpful because it equipped us to see that whether we realize it or not, we do have an inbuilt preferred way of doing things. But also that the way we do it isn't the only way. And it challenged people to be open to other people's way of doing things. And it provoked us with the challenge that however much we secretly think our way might be the only way or the best way, actually, if we really want to love our neighbor as we love ourselves, we need to humbly learn to speak their language, not simply continue obliviously with our own. So the question in the book wasn't so much about which love language is best or morally right. Rather, it was asking, how can I love you in the way most powerful for you? And actually, I think in many ways, this is what cultural awareness or intelligence is also all about, isn't it? It's gaining awareness that we do have a culturally inbuilt way of doing things that we default to, but that our way isn't the only way. And that if we're really to work and relate cross-culturally, we need to be aware of our own way, but also to be open to learning and embracing the ways of others, to speak their cultural love language, so to speak. And actually, when I asked Oya about the aim of CQ when we were talking about it, one thing she said was uyum sağlamak in Turkish. Now, it roughly translates, I think, and Oya, you can correct me later, it roughly translates to adapt or accommodate, but I think it can also be translated as to harmonize or to provide the harmony line to a melody. So it's kind of like metaphorically or literally, it's like we have the microphone, but we go to someone on our list and we say, today you sing your song, you take the lead, and I'll bring the harmony line to enrich your song. I think, isn't that such a beautiful insight, a beautiful way of thinking about it from a different cultural perspective? So the result of cultural awareness isn't so much about knowledge, rather the fruit is relationship. The result isn't about knowledge, the fruit is relationship. So I guess bluntly put, how capable are we of developing a relationship with someone different to ourselves? And I suppose we might add, how equipped are our churches or communities to do this? So let's get practical, let's break it down. How do we actually grow in cultural awareness? Well, I think there are 4 stages we go through that we're going to look at today. And I know that everybody in this room has stories of how you grew in cultural awareness through a different situation. I'm going to share one of my stories just because it's most familiar to me. And as I tell the story, I'd like you to think, what 4 stages or steps do I go through to grow in cultural awareness? And I will be asking you for some feedback in the chat afterwards. So here's the story. What 4 stages do I go through in learning? So relatively soon after we arrived in Turkey, a relative of someone we knew died. I wonder, what does your culture do when someone dies? Or maybe the cultures on your list, what do they do? Well, in my UK culture growing up, the time around death was kind of about giving people space to grieve in private without the embarrassment of having someone see you break down and cry. So in my upbringing, nuclear family members would stay at home together when they were grieving, but others from the community would maybe send a card or flowers, and later, a couple of weeks later probably, attend a quite formal funeral. So when this friend's relative died in the church in Turkey, we did our culturally respectful and appropriate thing, and we stayed away. We gave them space. We let them grieve in private. But I was curious, and I had this niggling sense that there might be another way of doing it in Turkey. So I went and I asked a Turkish friend, a big sister, Abla, what do you do when someone dies? Ruth, she said, in the West, you come together to celebrate. In the East, we come together to grieve. In the West, you come together when you celebrate, she said, but in the East, we come together when we grieve. And she told me that when you hear of someone's death from your community, it's normal to drop everything, go to their house and grieve with them. And the community cry and grieve together. So while in my upbringing, you didn't visit unless you were a close family member or a close friend, in Turkey, it seemed like if you wanted to be counted as family or a friend, you should go. Okay, this was quite a big new insight. So we made a plan. We said, okay, next time, I mean, we hope it doesn't happen, but next time if a friend's relative dies, we'd aim to go and be there. And actually, a year or so later, a really close friend's sister suddenly and very tragically passed away. Everything within us said, send a card, send some flowers, and stay away. But the key insight we had from our friend was still in our pockets with our plan. So we got in a taxi and we went to their house. Many of you can relate to this feeling, I'm sure. En route, we felt really nervous. We felt scared. We felt absolutely out of our depth and our comfort zone. And we were praying, Lord, please help us walk in. Please let there be someone else there in the house. Please loosen our British stiff upper lip so we can cry in public. And so we arrived to find the whole community packed into the flat, crying and wailing, grieving together. And we were taken into a bedroom to sit with our friends and cry with them. And it was a really tragic day, but it was also a really transformative day. And we learned about the power and beauty of communal lament from our Muslim friends that day. And there was a real peace that we felt that somehow, however wrong it all culturally felt to us, actually, it was the right way to show them that we love them. And a year or so later, they told us that it was that day they realized they could really rely on us as friends because we'd come and grieved with them. The end. Now, I'm aware that's not the lightest story to begin with. So just take a breath and have a think. I wonder if you caught some of the stages and steps we had to go through and grow through in cultural awareness there. So let's just have a few people write in the chat. Just write a word or an idea in the chat. What steps happened in our cultural growth? What did you observe? What did you see happening? What steps did we have to grow through? Any thoughts on what was happening, what we needed to learn? Someone in culture gave you a doorway. Yeah, getting out of your own comfort zone. Absolutely. Curiosity, yes. Asking questions. Excellent point, yeah. Yeah, recognition that we have a way and it might be different. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, being humble and willing. Excellent. Here are the 4 steps as I have them. We might have a graphic for it in a bit, but we'll see. The first one is curiosity. Absolutely. Faith nailed it there. Curiosity. And so this is, am I aware of my own way of doing something? And when I've realized I have a way, what are other ways of doing this? When I was chatting with Oya, she said, we need to start to look and pay close attention to what's going on around us. What other ways are there? From curiosity, we move to learning. And this is where we start thinking about where or who from can we get answers and wisdom. So where or who can we get answers and wisdom from? And who from our list, as we said, who from our list are the friends who can translate between the cultures for us? What key insights can they share? Then we move to planning. So curiosity, learning, planning. Dave wisely said as we were planning this, knowing isn't doing. So how does what we're learning affect our strategy for the next time? And from that kind of place here, absolutely brilliant. From the planning phase, we move into doing. So this is where we actually act on the plan that we've made, even if it feels, if we're honest, pretty bonkers, a bit silly. We might feel scared to do it. Again, it's not about knowledge. This is about relationship. So we grow in cultural awareness when we move around this circle. Thanks so much, John, for putting that up. And even better is when we cycle around this circle again and again, and we build a momentum into what we're doing. Now, in the business and cross-cultural coaching world, these 4 stages are talked about as capabilities that we can grow in both individually and corporately. So I think if we go to the next slide, we can see those. So here are the capabilities, we've arrived at them, the capabilities we need to be growing in cultural awareness. We've got curiosity becoming drive. This is your level of interest, persistence, and confidence during multicultural interactions. From drive to knowledge, your understanding, your level of understanding about how cultures are similar and different. Knowledge to strategy. Okay, maybe we know a lot, but how does this affect our awareness and ability to plan for multicultural interactions? And then from strategy, moving into the action bit, your ability to adapt when relating and working in multicultural contexts. So we just pause and think about that for a moment on that slide. I wonder if you just hold this up to yourself, or maybe the community that you're working in, you're thinking about in particular. Where would you say you are personally on this? Where are you seeing yourself as being very capable? How about your community? What capability level does your community have in these areas? Where are you already very capable? But what is the next capability you need to be growing in or developing? Maybe it's right at the beginning, a lack of drive and interest that needs to be built up in yourself or your community. I'm guessing if we're here, that's probably not the issue. Maybe it's thinking about, okay, actually, do you know what? I know a lot, but what does it mean to put that into strategy and action? Now, in a moment, we're going to head over to Dave, and we're going to hear some of his insights on what it looked like to start building some of these capabilities within the UK church context and from his experience in particular, and really honing in on the first areas here, the drive and knowledge. But just before we go to him, I wanted to share just a couple of points more from me. And I think we can stop sharing that for the moment, John, and just come back to me for a bit. That'll be fine. So the first one, curiosity and drive, this box mentioned confidence. Confidence. I think we need to keep praying for those in our communities who are not really interested, frankly, in multicultural interactions. But we also need to really look out for those who are curious, but not confident. And I think, being honest, looking online right now and looking on social media, it's really easy to see the ways we can mess up cultural interactions. What's at stake if we do? And it looks a bit scary. So I guess maybe a challenge for us here is, who is God specifically calling you to build confidence in this area from your community? Who can you draw alongside you in what you're doing to build them up in confidence? God can really use you and a few people around you like yeast in the dough as you go around this cultural awareness cycle together. I actually feel like this is quite a significant point. I'm kind of imagining God taking some people from here today, maybe drawing a couple of people alongside you, maybe in your local church context, and asking, as you go around this cycle together, what are we curious about? What is the Holy Spirit prompting us to look at in our community? How can we grow in confidence? Where is our curiosity being piqued? What are we learning? How can we learn? Where can we grow in knowledge? Okay, so what strategy ideas then from this knowledge that we've got could we bring for our community? Or maybe present to the leadership team if we're not in that ourselves? And where would we be willing to give something a go, even if it feels a bit awkward, to start something being modeled in a different way in our community? Maybe in a big way, maybe in a small way. And like Rebecca said earlier, it doesn't take a lot of yeast to leaven the whole dough. Even a small seed can really become a huge tree. We're called, I think, to be confidence builders in others. And finally, before we go to Dave, just one more point for me. How easy do we find it to ask others questions about their lives or their viewpoints? I remember when we arrived in Turkey, I was petrified of offending someone. So I didn't initiate any connection to begin with, if I'm honest. I remember our team members praying for me to have courage to knock on a neighbour's door. It's still quite ingrained in me today. Maybe it's a British thing. But ironically, I realised that my fear of offending meant that I offended people by appearing disinterested and cold. Oya really encouraged me when she said that she didn't get offended by us lot as a team overseas because it was obvious how much effort we were making. Thank you, Oya. People, I think, are less offended when they see that we're making an effort. And so growing in learning means normalizing in ourselves, but also in our communities, asking those humble questions, as we've already said in the chat, and welcoming the questions of others about ourselves, maybe getting past the boundary of, are people being nosy? Are we being nosy? And being curious and loving instead. So Dave, over to you. What insights would you like to share with us about what practically has helped you and the church to grow in confidence and curiosity in these capabilities?
Yep, I'm here. Yes, I'm Dave. I've been in Kettering for about 3 years. Prior to that, lived in London, central London, just near Tower Bridge for about 42 years and led a church there for about 20. Ruth has helpfully given me 2 questions. And the first is, what has helped the church to grow in confidence and curiosity? And I think the first thing we did was determine that we wanted to be an international church. And that was, we wanted to reflect the area in which we lived. We lived in central London. We had close by between 25 to 30 nationalities. And we wanted to reflect that in our church. And so just talking about it and acknowledging that that's what we wanted to do, setting out the vision, and then acknowledging that it was a journey. This was going to take time, and it was also going to not be an easy journey. There's certain fears about learning about other cultures. There's certain vulnerabilities about learning where yours is not as good as you thought it was. And so the first 2 steps for us was setting out the vision that we wanted it to happen. And the second was acknowledging that this is a long journey. The other thing I think that I've noticed in some churches, they want to become a multicultural church, but you also need to help people understand that you're not asking them to change their culture. It's not that the church is suddenly going to become Asian, African, Persian, but that you're looking to produce a church where different cultures are comfortable worshipping together, praying together, and being together, and that everybody feels accepted, that people feel safe, they feel that they can enjoy being together. And some of that is drawing out the benefits of the different cultures, recognizing that every culture has some elements in it which reflect a biblical kingdom culture. They have some elements in it that are very opposed to biblical and kingdom culture, and some that are completely neutral. It really doesn't matter. So it's drawing out the benefits and recognizing that. I think the other thing is, as Susie alluded to in hers, and Ruth has, it's helping people to ask questions, because people, particularly English people, we find questions difficult. Other cultures really enjoy questions. My wife and I also traveled quite a bit. And one of the things, she's a great cook and she loves cooking. And we particularly traveled to Islamic nations, and trying to get into the kitchen to learn was really, really difficult, because people thought she was coming to tell them what to do or to help them, and they didn't feel that as a guest she should be helping them, but she just wanted to learn. And quite by accident one day, she's close to the kitchen, trying to get in, trying to find out. And the girl comes out with an onion cut in a particular way. And Leslie just said to her, "How did you cut that onion?" And she said, "Oh, well, it's easy. That's how we always cut it." And she just sort of cut it up in her hand, very, very simply. But that opened the door because the person suddenly realized, actually, Leslie wanted to learn how to cook that nation's food. And that really helped getting her in and under the culture. I think the other thing for sort of people coming into UK churches is asking people just to talk about the story of their life. At the church I was at previously, we actually held, I think, over about 18 months, several Sunday evenings where we would all sit around a table, all mixed cultures, and would just ask things like, how do you celebrate at the birth of a child? How do you celebrate death or grieve over death? An interesting one was always, what games did you play from the age of 0 to 7? And then you'd also talk about what sort of things you did. And one of the funniest evenings was one of our guys, an English guy, had lived in Uganda for many years as a child. And he was just saying, what I missed when I came back from Uganda was I had to start wearing shoes. And he said, because in Uganda, I could just run around barefoot day in and day out. And one of our Africans was absolutely appalled at this and said, what do you mean? Your mum and dad, who could afford shoes, let you run around without shoes? That's terrible. And the whole sort of table ignited into this argument about whether he should have worn shoes or not. But it just opened up more discussion about how people live. So I think it's about having a determination, an intentionality, acknowledging the journey, recognizing that we're not all trying to become one culture. We are all our cultures, drawing out the benefits, and then helping people to ask questions. One of the things that we're learning to do here in Kettering is we have about probably 20%, 25% now African representation. And pastorally, it's like we're going to one or two of our guys and say, how do we, this is how we would solve this as English people. How would you solve this? How would you help these people? What are your answers to this? And I think as Susie and Ruth has said, one of the things you're doing is you're trying to learn how different cultures function, and recognizing that you're not the only way of doing things. So that's the sort of thing we did to help the church grow in confidence and curiosity. The next one she gave me was, how has curiosity and the knowledge you gained impacted your strategy? Well, the first thing is to recognize, come what may, you're always learning. You always feel like you've got L plates on no matter where you are. But one of the things it has done is we deliberately now challenge people to think about the way why they do things. One of the most interesting questions to ask an English person is, why do you eat with a knife and fork? Because they just don't understand the question. Well, it's obvious why you eat with the knife and fork. And then you say, yeah, but do you realize that probably the majority of the world do not eat with a knife and fork? So why do you do it? And it just opens people's eyes that there is another way of living in quite an unthreatening way. And it opens their eyes to different cultures. My previous church had an interesting example. A number of ladies had sort of been gathering together and talking, and they sort of ganged up on me and came to me and said, look, Dave, can you sort this problem out? And I said, well, what's the problem? And said, well, there's this couple, they have a child of 5 and a child of 3, and they're all sleeping in the same bed together. And I think you need to stop this. So I thought, well, give me a week and I'll just go back. And so I went through the Bible and I thought, how do I challenge this in the Bible? The trouble was, the only story in the Bible that I could come across was of the man who gets woken up at midnight and has to climb over his children because they're in bed with them. So I have to go back and say, actually, I can't challenge this. Although in some ways, everything within me is saying, I'm not sure this is a good thing. Actually, biblically, the only story I can find is with a man and his wife and the kids are in bed with them. So I can't challenge it. And it was interesting because there was everything within me wanted to go to this couple and say, this is not a good thing. But actually, it was their lifestyle choice. And I couldn't come biblically and say, this is not good. And that provoked within me a sort of an odd reaction of, I would love to challenge it, but I don't think I can. And actually, there are quite a number of cultures where people only have one bedroom. And our culture is very much everyone has their own bedroom, etc. And it just makes you have to rethink and re-challenge your way of doing things. So we do look to challenge people about the way why they do things. Also, changing the activities that you do is an interesting one. We learned this particularly over Alpha, actually, and this was not different cultures. This was much more a working class, middle class thing. We ran our first Alpha and we set it up as you do an Alpha, the food's there, we're all ready. And on the night, 7:30, all our middle class people turned up to eat. At 8 o'clock, our more working class people turned up. I mean, sort of, you do know you're late. Said, oh, we just wanted to miss the food. I said, what do you mean? Said, well, we only eat at home. We don't go to restaurants. We eat as a family. We would just never eat together in this situation. We actually had to change our Alpha in the way that we did it, because here was a culture that actually wasn't used to eating together and didn't like it, and they were threatened by it. And we just had to say, okay, we will do this differently to bring people in. And another one, when I first came to Kettering, actually, we had a number of prayer meetings which were pretty poorly attended, and certainly none of our Africans attended. So I said, look, why don't we just have a 10 till midnight prayer meeting? To which I was roundly told, actually, no one will come to that. I said, our Africans will. Why? Because that's when they're used to praying, 10 till midnight. And so we had the prayer meeting, and it was probably the best attended prayer meeting we'd had for a long, long time. And the English people mostly turned up saying, well, we're here for a short time, Dave. And Africans were there, and they were there for the whole time. Actually, at 12:15, I had to stop the meeting, say, actually, guys, we do need to stop now and go home. And everyone said, that was amazing. But it was just adapting, having a different culture in the church, that you just have to adapt your activities to the cultures and learn and ask, what actually would you do? We have a very, very long way to go on that. I know that. Also, in leadership, it's interesting. My son went to Australia to a church which was very heavily dominated by South Africans, and they're very forceful. They're very sort of in your face. This is what I can do. Da 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 da. And in our church at home, he'd been our key worship leader, and he goes to this church and they say, you know, what do you do? He said, well, I can, can play the guitar. And they went, okay, just sit down over there. And after about 2 months, they were at a meeting and there was no guitarist. So he picked up the guitar and said, well, I'll lead the worship. And afterwards, you can really lead worship. And he said, yeah, I told you that. But he told them in such a reserved way that they couldn't see that he could actually do it, because they were expecting a much more forceful. And other cultures are much less people who come forth, and you need to ask them, that, can you do this? We had a celebration at the church, and in the early, when I first came, and we had a sort of catering team. And I remember just saying at the time, I said, well, we've got an awful lot of Africans, can't we ask them to do the cooking? And the first response was, well, would they be able to? And I was like, yeah, I think they could do it a lot better than us. And so we got them to do it. At the end of that particular time, we ended up with two kitchens. We had a white kitchen and a black kitchen. Since then, we've managed to draw the two teams together. So now when we eat together, it's much more a joint effort. But it took time, it took learning, it took understanding one another and just questioning and learning how to draw people in. I think the other thing was learning to explain things. We, generally speaking, I try to speak in some form on clothing twice a year, simply because as English people, we tend to dress down to church. Other cultures like to really dress up. And the only real thing the Bible says about clothes is it should be modest and inexpensive. And anything else is, hey, come and dress as you feel comfortable. I genuinely, at one time in New Frontiers, used to turn up to New Frontiers leaders meetings just occasionally wearing a tie, just because in New Frontiers leaders context, it was totally countercultural, because no one wore a tie. It was too sort of official. And I'd always say, oh, you're going to a funeral afterwards? I said, no, I'm just wearing a tie. And you want people to feel comfortable. So those that want to dress up can dress up, and those that want to dress down can dress down. But it's seen as being the same. And I think that's important. I think there's an awful lot of explanation for people to understand how some cultures are based on time and some cultures are based on people. And cultures that are based on people will inevitably be late. And it's like, don't they realize they should be here on time? No, their priority was talking to people, or it's a relationship. Whereas our priority very often in England is time. And there is a balance there. But just helping people understand, look, you're all about time, they're all about people. You're all about people, they're all about time. We've got to work this together so that we come together. I think the other thing in terms of a British context is not trying too hard. A lot of cultures that come to an English church are coming because they want to understand British culture, and they don't want to change the church too much because they want a British church. And it takes time and friendship to be able to draw out, look, you're among us. You may be Colombian, you may be sort of Ghanaian, you may be Nigerian. You can add to us. And we don't want to be, we're a church in England, but we don't want to be an English church. We want to be a church that adequately reflects all the cultures in it. But sometimes you can jump in too quickly, and you just need to develop friendship, relationship, so that people feel confident to add in to the church that you're in. I'm going to stop there.
Wow, Dave, thank you so much. What a richness of experience and story. And I mean, tie-wearing rebel that you are. Amazing, really helpful stories. And just to say, I will be releasing the slides, a link to the slides, and also some extra questions that you can be asking yourselves or your communities to be growing in some more of these capabilities that you can then take away. I'll put a link to that a bit later. But just to kind of finish up, I wanted to mention something that Dave has kind of alluded to in what he's been saying, and that we've been talking about the whole conference, which is the cost and the character of cultural awareness. I was listening to a talk by Dave Holden from our Wider New Frontiers family the other day, and he made the throwaway comment that building relationally is inconvenient, which I thought, wow. And I think what the business world misses out on with this CQ cycle is the cost and the character required to grow in cultural awareness. Another person I spoke to in preparing this, who I won't say who they were, said that growing in cultural awareness is, excuse my language here, but bloody hard. And as many people who are here and who are living cross-culturally, have worked cross-culturally, or are here in the UK living cross-culturally, can attest to, it can be really difficult, especially where you feel like that process is going around and it's one-sided, you're making a lot of the effort. So it's really essential that, of course, we keep coming back to Jesus, who has walked the hard and the bloody road for us, who has shown us how worth it our effort is and how worthy he is of our persistence and growth in this, both to prepare his bride, but also to become his bride. I think the CQ cycle requires godly character to do it, but it also builds godly character in us as we go around it. If you like, character fills the gaps. And John, there's one sort of final box slide, which maybe you'd be able to show. Absolutely, that's it, perfect. So to move from drive to knowledge, we need love. From knowledge to strategy, we need wisdom. From strategy to action, we surely need courage. And from action to move back around to drive and keep cycling again, we need to be giving and receiving forgiveness and grace. So the capabilities are kind of the scene things that we're wanting to equip people in and grow in intentionally, as we've been talking about. The other is what we're fervently praying for ourselves and our communities, and asking the Holy Spirit to bring about as the fruit in our lives and in the lives of our people. Sometimes I've been stuck on the cycle and it's been more of a character thing, a fruit of the Spirit thing, than a knowledge or awareness thing. One is, if you like, the orange is the head journey and the black bit is more the heart journey. I just want to share one final story with you about how this has worked out in Turkey. And then we might have some space at the end, hopefully, for just some feedback or questions. So here's another story, and maybe you can see how these things came into play as I share it. So you can stop sharing that slide now, John, that'd be fine. Thanks so much. So when we started the church in Istanbul, we decided to do a monthly bring and share lunch. Some of you on here will remember this. And in one season, I was in charge of organizing it. And so I gave a notice the week before telling everyone to bring something. And on the day, we got a random hodgepodge of things we put on a big table in a kind of free-for-all buffet. I mean, that's kind of how shared lunches go, right? Well, I noticed a strange pattern repeating itself. One Kurdish sister has a massive hospitality gift, and she would always bring in several huge trays of food to share with everyone. And every month, an Australian family, nationality changed, would always bring in a small tray of brownies, about 8 portions. And every month, my Kurdish sister would cut the brownie tray bake into about 60 pieces. So everybody had a toothful of brownie. Now, after a few months, my fear of conflict was overcome by my curiosity. And so I asked my Kurdish sister, why are you cutting the brownie so small? Ruth, she said, when it comes to the mealtime, I see the first people getting all the good things, e.g. the brownies, and then everyone else being left out. I see the visitors who hold back missing out on the nicest dishes. And I see the elders and the prayer team who stay behind in the meeting, serving people, only getting the leftovers, when I think we should honour our elders and our serving teams. We say we're family and we say we're all equal, but the way we're eating the meal, it doesn't show that. I just want to make sure that everyone has good food and feels honored and part of the family. I was gobsmacked. I realized that it was a moment to see what I had been modeling from her perspective. And that's kind of what CQ is all about as well, right? It's not just learning about other cultures, but seeing how other cultures view and receive our own. I found her observation really helpful, but also humbling, because I realized that although I said we were family and equals, what I was modeling was actually you snooze, you lose, first come, first serve, and leaders eat last, which is kind of good as a leadership principle, but not a church culture. So I was like, what do we do? What strategy can we have? I can't tell the Australian family to bake 60 brownies. Here's what we do, she said, and I'll try and be quick. We need to create a menu for each meal. Choose a main, a side, a dessert, drinks. We'll ask 5 people to bring the same main, 5 to bring the same side, 5 to bring the same dessert. Youth group can bring the drinks. Then we can portion it out on plates, and everyone, late or early, will know they're equally valued and part of our family. And that's what we did. It was genius, because the Westerners who needed to choose what they were bringing, they could all choose the course. And those from more of a hierarchical collective background who were happy to honor their leaders were able to find a value through place and a clear outline of what they could bring. So my sister led us into a different cultural way, but a biblical way for us. It was literally, though we are many, we're one body because we all share in one bread. So just to finish, growing together is hard work, but it is beautiful, enriching, revealing, it's sanctifying, and it brings about the purpose of God, who is making widely known his manifold wisdom through the church and through us, globally, locally. So let's keep being curious, learning, going into strategy and acting on it, but also praying for love, wisdom, courage, forgiveness, and grace.